The sky hung low over Willow Creek, a bruised canvas of gray and violet, swollen with the promise of rain. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of damp earth and the faint musk of the forest that fringed the small town. Ethan Caldwell, a man of 32 with hands calloused from years of carpentry and eyes that carried the weight of unspoken grief, stood at the edge of the swollen creek. Its waters churned, a frothing beast of mud and debris, swollen from days of relentless downpour. The townsfolk had been warned to stay clear. Flash floods had claimed more than one careless soul in years past. But Ethan, solitary by nature, was drawn to the water's edge, as if it whispered secrets only he could hear. He was not a man prone to heroics. Ethan preferred the quiet rhythm of his workshop, the steady hum of his planer, the scent of pine shavings curling beneath his blade. But that afternoon, something primal stirred within him, a restlessness that tugged at his boots and sent him wandering toward the creek. He wore his faded flannel jacket, the one his father had left him, its cuffs frayed but warm, and his boots sank into the sodden earth as he scanned the water's surface. That's when he saw it. A flash of tawny fur, a pair of amber eyes wide with panic, thrashing against the current. A bobcat, not a house cat, not some stray dog swept away by the flood, but a wild, sinewy creature, its claws scrabbling against a half-submerged log. Its snarls were desperate, swallowed by the roar of the creek. Ethan froze, his breath catching in his throat. He'd seen bobcats before, fleeting shadows in the woods, but never like this, vulnerable, fighting for its life. The sight clawed at something deep within him, a memory of his sister, Clara, who drowned in this very creek a decade ago, her laughter silenced by the same merciless current. He hadn't been there to save her. The guilt still gnawed at him, a quiet rot in his chest. Without thinking, Ethan waded into the shallows, the icy water biting through his jeans. The current tugged at his legs, hungry, insistent, but he braced himself against a boulder and extended a branch toward the bobcat. "Come on, you stubborn bastard," he muttered, his voice rough but steady. The animal hissed, baring its fangs, but its strength was fading, its body trembling as the water dragged it under. Ethan leaned farther, his boots slipping on the slick riverbed, and with a grunt, he hooked the branch under the bobcat's foreleg. It clawed at the wood, its eyes locking onto his, not with gratitude but with a wild, unyielding will to survive. He pulled, muscle straining, the branch creaking under the weight. The bobcat scrambled, its claws raking the air, until it found purchase on the bank. With a final heave, Ethan hauled it onto the muddy shore, where it collapsed, panting, its sodden fur plastered to its lean frame. He stumbled back, chest heaving, water dripping from his jacket. The bobcat shook itself, spraying droplets, and for a moment, they stared at each other, man and beast, bound by a fleeting moment of shared defiance against the creek's wrath. Ethan expected it to bolt, to vanish into the underbrush as bobcats did. But it didn't. It crouched low, ears twitching, its gaze fixed on him with an intensity that sent a shiver down his spine. "Go on," he said, waving a hand. "You're free." The bobcat didn't move. Instead, it let out a low, guttural sound. Not a growl, not a purr, but something else, something that felt like a warning and a promise all at once. That's when he heard the shouts. Turning, Ethan saw a cluster of neighbors on the ridge above, their faces a mix of awe and disbelief. Old Mrs. Hargrove, who'd lived by the creek for 60 years, clutched her shawl, her mouth agape. Tommy Vance, the gas station clerk with a penchant for gossip, was already pulling out his phone, no doubt ready to spin this into a tale for the ages. "Ethan Caldwell, you damn fool," called out Sheriff Boone, his voice carrying over the wind. "You trying to get yourself killed?" Ethan shrugged, wiping mud from his hands. "It was drowning," he said simply, but his voice trembled, betraying the adrenaline still coursing through him. The crowd murmured, their eyes darting between him and the bobcat, which still hadn't fled. It was unnatural, they whispered. Bobcats didn't linger. They didn't stare at men like that, with eyes that seemed to see too much. As the rain began to fall again, a slow, cold drizzle, Ethan felt a prickle at the back of his neck. The bobcat's gaze hadn't wavered, and now it took a step toward him, its movements deliberate, almost ceremonial. The crowd gasped, stepping back. Ethan's heart thudded, but he held his ground, his instincts screaming that this was no ordinary animal. There was something ancient in its eyes, something that spoke of the forest's deep secrets, of things older than the town itself. That night, as Ethan sat in his small cabin, the fire crackling in the hearth, he couldn't shake the image of those eyes. He'd locked the door, checked it twice, but the unease lingered. The bobcat had finally slunk into the woods, but not before it had circled him once, its tail flicking like a metronome. The neighbors had dispersed, their whispers trailing behind them, already weaving stories of Ethan's reckless bravery. But bravery wasn't what he felt. It was something else, something that tasted like fate. At midnight, a sound woke him. Not a knock, not a creak, but a low, rhythmic scratching at his door. His blood ran cold. He grabbed the old hunting knife from his bedside table, its blade dulled but comforting in his grip. The scratching stopped, replaced by a silence so heavy it seemed to press against the walls. Ethan crept to the window, peering through the gap in the curtains. The moonlight bathed the yard in silver, and there, just beyond the porch, stood the bobcat. Its eyes glowed like twin embers, unblinking, watching. But it wasn't alone. Behind it, barely visible in the shadows, were others, shapes that moved with the same silent grace, their eyes glinting in the dark. Ethan's breath hitched. He counted 3, maybe 4, their forms indistinct but unmistakably feline. Bobcats didn't travel in packs. They were solitary, territorial. Yet here they were, gathered like sentinels, their gazes fixed on his cabin. He stepped back, heart pounding, the knife trembling in his hand. The bobcat he'd saved tilted its head, as if acknowledging him, and then, with a flick of its tail, it turned and melted into the night. The others followed, their forms dissolving into the forest. Ethan stood frozen, the weight of their eyes lingering like a brand on his skin. He didn't sleep that night. The scratching didn't return, but the silence was worse, thick with the promise of something yet to come. By morning, the town was buzzing. Tommy Vance had spread the story, embellished with flourishes of Ethan wrestling the bobcat barehanded. Mrs. Hargrove swore she'd seen a glow around the animal, like a halo of wildfire. Sheriff Boone stopped by, his face grim, and handed Ethan a grainy photo from a trail camera near the creek. It showed the bobcat, its fur matted but unmistakable, standing on a rock. Behind it, faint but undeniable, were the shapes of other cats, their eyes like stars in the grainy black and white. "Ethan," Boone said, his voice low, "what the hell did you pull out of that creek?" Ethan didn't answer. He couldn't, because deep down he knew this wasn't the end. The bobcat hadn't just been saved, it had chosen him. And whatever came next, it would shock Willow Creek to its core. The days following the creek incident draped Willow Creek in a peculiar hush, as if the town itself held its breath. Ethan Caldwell, once a man who slipped through life unnoticed, now carried the weight of curious glances and whispered tales. The air was colder now, the autumn rains giving way to a brittle chill that clung to the bones. Ethan's cabin, perched on the edge of the forest, felt less like a refuge and more like a stage, its walls too thin to keep out the eyes he sensed watching from the dark. The bobcat's visit that first night had left a mark, not on his door, but on his soul. He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd crossed a threshold, stepped into a story older than the pines that loomed over his home. By the third day, the town's gossip had taken on a life of its own. Tommy Vance, with his knack for exaggeration, spun tales of Ethan as a modern-day St. Francis, taming wild beasts with a glance. Mrs. Hargrove, her eyes sharp despite her age, spoke of omens, of the forest waking after years of slumber. Sheriff Boone, ever practical, urged Ethan to stay away from the creek, citing reports of strange tracks, too many, too deliberate, circling the water's edge. Ethan nodded, promised to keep his distance, but the pull was stronger than reason. The bobcat's amber eyes haunted him, a silent summons he couldn't ignore. That evening, as the sun bled crimson into the horizon, Ethan slipped into his jacket and headed into the woods. He told himself it was to clear his head, to shake off the town's chatter, but his feet carried him toward the creek, the knife in his pocket a cold reassurance. The forest was alive with sound, the rustle of leaves, the snap of twigs, the distant hoot of an owl, but beneath it all was a rhythm, a pulse that seemed to hum through the earth itself. He reached the creek, its waters calmer now, a glassy mirror reflecting the twilight. And there it was, the bobcat, perched on the same rock from Boone's photo, its silhouette stark against the fading light. Ethan's breath caught. The animal didn't move, didn't growl, just watched him with that same unnerving intensity. But this time it wasn't alone. From the underbrush emerged others. 5, 6, their eyes glinting like shards of moonlight. They formed a loose semicircle, their movements fluid, deliberate, as if choreographed by some ancient instinct. Ethan's hand tightened on the knife, but he didn't draw it. There was no threat in their posture, only a strange, expectant stillness. "You again," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. The lead bobcat, the one he'd pulled from the creek, tilted its head, its ears flicking. Then, with a grace that belied its wildness, it leaped from the rock and approached him, stopping just out of arm's reach. It lowered its head, nosing at the ground, and Ethan saw it. A faint trail of disturbed earth, leading deeper into the forest. The other bobcats turned, their bodies aligned with the path, and the leader glanced back at him as if to say, "Follow." He hesitated. Every instinct screamed to turn back, to return to the safety of his cabin. But the memory of Clara's laughter, bright and fleeting before the creek claimed her, anchored him to the moment. He followed. The bobcats moved silently, their forms weaving through the trees, guiding him through a labyrinth of roots and shadows. The trail led to a clearing he'd never seen, though he'd walked these woods for years. At its center stood a gnarled oak, its branches twisted like the fingers of an ancient hand, and at its base, a slab of stone, half buried, etched with symbols that seemed to writhe in the dim light. The bobcats circled the stone, their movements almost ritualistic. Ethan's skin prickled as he approached, the air thick with a scent he couldn't place. Earthy, metallic, alive. The symbols on the stone were unlike anything he'd seen. Not Native American, not Norse, but something older, their curves and angles pulsing with a rhythm that matched the hum in the earth. The lead bobcat sat before the stone, its eyes locked on his, and for a moment, Ethan felt a presence. Not in the air, but in his mind, a whisper of thoughts not his own. "You saved me. Now see." The ground trembled, a low rumble that sent a flock of birds scattering from the trees. The stone shifted, splitting open with a groan, revealing a hollow beneath. Ethan stumbled back, heart pounding, as a faint glow emanated from the crevice, casting eerie shadows across the clearing. The bobcats didn't flinch, They sat, unblinking, as if guarding a secret unveiled. Against every shred of sense, Ethan peered into the hollow. Inside was a pool of water impossibly still, its surface reflecting not the sky but a scene. A town like Willow Creek, yet not, its streets lined with figures cloaked in furs, their faces hidden, moving in a procession toward a great fire. He blinked and the vision shifted. Clara stood before him, her hair wet, her eyes bright with life. "Ethan," she said, her voice clear as the creek before the flood. "You weren't too late." Tears stung his eyes, and he reached for her. But the image dissolved, replaced by the bobcat's face, its eyes mirrored in the water. The vision faded, leaving only the glow and a voice. Not Clara's, not human, whispered, "The forest remembers." Ethan staggered back, his mind reeling. The bobcats rose as one, their eyes still on him, and the leader stepped forward, brushing against his leg. A gesture not of affection but of acknowledgement. Then they vanished into the trees, leaving him alone with the stone, the glow fading as the crevice sealed itself shut. He returned to town at dawn, mud-stained and shaken, the knife untouched in his pocket. The neighbors noticed his absence, their whispers growing fevered. Tommy Vance swore he'd seen lights in the woods, like will-o'-the-wisps. Mrs. Hargrove spoke of an old legend, half forgotten, of a pact between the town's founders and the forest, sealed with a stone that guarded its heart. Sheriff Boone, skeptical but rattled, showed Ethan another trail camera photo, this one of the clearing, the stone glowing faintly, surrounded by bobcats. Word spread, and by noon, a crowd had gathered at Ethan's cabin, demanding answers. He told them what he could, the creek, the bobcats, the stone, but not the vision of Clara, nor the voice in his mind. They listened, some with awe, others with fear. A few, led by Tommy, wanted to find the stone, to dig it up, to see what secrets it held. But Mrs. Hargrove, her voice trembling, warned against it. "The forest gives and it takes," she said. "You don't disturb what it guards." That night, Ethan sat by his fire, the weight of the day pressing against him. The scratching returned, softer this time, almost reverent. He didn't open the door. He didn't need to. Through the window, he saw the bobcat, alone now, its eyes glowing in the dark. It didn't approach, didn't linger, just watched for a moment before slipping back into the night. Willow Creek would never be the same. The stone remained hidden, the bobcats a fleeting presence, but the town felt the shift. A reminder that some bonds, forged in acts of courage or desperation, stretched beyond the human, into the wild heart of the world. Ethan, marked by the forest, carried its secret in silence, knowing he'd been spared, chosen, or perhaps both. And the neighbors, forever changed by the man who'd pulled a bobcat from the creek, watched the woods with new eyes, wondering what else lay waiting in the shadows.